And what is going on, everyone? And welcome to a very special edition of Houston Texans football on Bleacher Report. I am one part of your show, Ruben Calvillo. The man next to me, Harley Dugan. You can find him on YouTube at TheLead_Houston. How's it going, big dog?
Doing just fine, man. We got a lot to talk about today. A lot of guys that ended up getting cut today as we approach closer
Mhm.
and closer to free agency. We got a little bit of a restructure for the Texans. Some cap
Yeah,
space opened up. There's a lot that happened, man.
yeah, a lot of
Excited
news
about
today.
this.
Yeah, a lot of news today. And, before we jump into a quick shout out to Bleach Report allowing us to come on here talk Houston Texans football. Always a big shout out to the man upstairs. Let's stay in Houston for this part, Harley. Wide receiver Nico Collins and the Houston Texans have restructured his contract, freeing up $10 million in cap space for the Houston Texans to mess around with in just a couple of days because free agency, dude, it's right about to start.
Yeah.
However, Nico Collins contract restructure, great job by him. Very, very young player in this league, but he is, I would say he is a veteran, Harley, on this Houston Texans team, man. He is leading by example. Love that Nico Collins did this. And according to Texans cap, the projected cap space is around $18 million right now for the Houston Texans.
Yeah, and hey, that's exactly what you wanted to hear. That's music to the ears of many Texans
Mhm.
fans is opening up some cap space, and this is what you hope happens, and indeed did happen. And you just want more, right? Like you got to get some more cap space. Expect a few more restructures to happen, maybe an extension to push some money back. Like there's multiple ways to get into opening up more cap space for this team and so they can have some cash to spend on free agency upcoming.
Yeah, we know that some players that could restructure their contract. Laramie Tunsil, our left tackle, he's done it before. Titus Howard, currently our left guard. Now maybe you renegotiate a deal for a cheaper salary because Titus Howard not a tackle for you anymore, but a guard. And also Daniil Hunter, only 1 year left on his deal. If
Mm.
you want him to be a Houston Texans long term, you could get a deal done that will save you some money. A lot of moves that the Houston Texans can still make. Which ones do you expect to happen? I feel like a Titus Howard one and Laramie Tunsil one are very likely.
Yeah, for sure. I can. Laramie Tunsil, it seems like from what some people were talking, is that Laramie Tunsil's kind of like the break glass in case of emergency kind of
Okay.
restructure. So we'll see whether or not they delve into Laramie Tunsil or not. Daniel Hunter, to me, is an obvious one. That is somebody that they can open into and restructuring and trying to figure out some money there with him and push them back, give them that higher bonus or however they do it. So I think Daniel Hunter is more of an option there,
Mm-hmm.
and then Titus is. For some reason I just don't get the feeling that Titus would want to restructure his contract. But who knows? That's not to say that he's upset or anything. That's just I just have a feeling that he doesn't want to restructure his contract. And I think Daniel Hunter and then ultimately Laramie Tunsil is going to be the other guy that's going to have to try to restructure his deal, and the Texans are going to have to figure this out, man. There's ways to manipulate the cap, as everyone says, and I think Daniel Hunter's the one. I think that's the one I'm going to lean on.
I agree also, and we've both had this conversation about Daniil Hunter.
Mm-hmm.
His play is going to age, and he is in Houston. He already took less money to come to Houston. If you remember, the Indianapolis Colts offered him more money than the Houston Texans to
Yeah.
sign when he was a free agent last season. Chose to go to the H instead. Maybe he gets it done, and maybe we're able to bring in some more talent to surround our quarterback, CJ Stroud. So, to wrap this up, Nico Collins restructures his contract, freeing up $10 million of cap space. The next news. Now, this was, kind of I don't want to say heartbreaking because we knew that, some more work had to be done, but Tank Dell having
Mm.
ACL surgery today. Now, it's safe to say that he will not be playing in 2025. And, Harley, I think this is a very serious injury. We all remember Cecil Shorts, former Houston Texan, former Jaguar. He tweeted out that the injury that Tank Dell suffered was the one that ended his career. And, this is a tough conversation. It's even tough to talk about right now because Tank Dell was so beloved here in Houston. The story during the draft, him texting him the night before on Instagram, come get me. We all love Tank Dell down here in the H. And I just feel like, bro, we have to start thinking of a plan where maybe we don't have to rely on Tank Dell, in the next 1 to 2 years. Maybe, just already pencil him as your wide receiver 4 and 5 and keep on building the position.
Yeah, I think the Texans ultimately have to move on with that mindset themselves. It's unfortunate to say, but this is the unfortunate part of business. Injuries happen, and you have to move on as an organization. And it's extremely tough for a lot of Houstonians, a lot of the Texans fans that also cross over as Houston Cougar fans, and that includes myself. I'm very biased sometimes when I talk about Tank Dell, but I know how great of a wide receiver he can be. I know how good he is when he's healthy and on the field doing his thing. And it's unfortunate that this happened to him. I do believe that he will come back.
Mm,
Obviously, it's not going to be happening next year. I don't see him coming back next year. Pencil him in for 2027, hopefully. And that's what you're hoping for. So it's tough, man. It sucks, absolutely sucks. But uh, beyond anything, I hope the player, not the player, the human being himself, Tank
mm-hmm,
Dell, Nathaniel Dell. I hope he is fine. Like I hope mentally he's all right, and I hope he's okay to even walk again, man. Because that's extremely tough what he's going through, and it's going to take a lot out of him mentally as
mm-hmm,
well as physically to come back, even at his stature. Like that is his game. 5'9", 170. His game is the quickness, the shiftiness. Like I'm hoping this injury doesn't take that away from him, because if it does, then you would be looking at the end of Tank Dell's career. And that's not what we want here in Houston. You mentioned the history between him and CJ Stroud and the drafting 2023 draft process. And that was a lot of fun as well, too. The storylines and everything, and him wanting to stay here in Houston. It sucks because you might just never see him
mm-hmm.
work with Nick Caley. We might not ever see it. Nick Caley could be so good year one that maybe he gets moved on to be a head coach fast. And so I'd hate to not see a Tank Dell in a Nick Caley offense. That would be heartbreaking for me, because I think Tank Dell would be in a big year with Nick Caley. But it is what it is, man. You got to move forward, and you got to scout and draft and
Mm.
sign free agents without Tank Dell.
And that's and that's the point, that I wanted to harp on the most. Like, even though we love Tank Dell, this is a business at the end of the day, and we will hold a spot for him. We will wish him the very best, but we got to keep on going to places where we've never gone before, and that's an AFC championship and a division win.
Mhm.
So when you talk about the number of wide receivers that we found out today will be available once free agency hits. Let's start with the first one. And that was Tyler Lockett. Him and the Seattle Seahawks, after a decade, are parting ways. Now, he finished his time in Seattle with 8,594 receiving yards. Dude, just a fantastic career. Has a Super Bowl in between these past 10 seasons in Seattle. He is now a free agent. You brought up the possibility of him being a potential fit in Las Vegas with Pete Carroll. What are your thoughts on Tyler Lockett being a free agent? Would that entertain you?
He's 33 years old. I don't
Mm,
mind Tyler Lockett. I don't, but he's near the bottom of this list when it comes to just the free agents that came
mm,
out for wide receivers. We're not even including what you could potentially draft in the NFL. So Tyler Lockett, if we did include potential rookies into this equation, like Lockett would even go below them. Yeah, he could be a cheap option.
Mm,
He could be a solid veteran for you, but I think there's a better veteran that already has a connection to Nick Caley that is out there in free agency. That is a former LA Rams. He's 31 years old. Demarcus Robinson to me is a
mm,
better option if you're looking for a veteran wide receiver. He's already familiar with the scheme. He just had his best season of his career when Nick Caley got promoted to pass game coordinator this previous year. Demarcus Robinson had a hell of a year. 11 touchdowns in 2 years. He had 14 touchdowns total with the Kansas City Chiefs. And in 2 years with the Rams, he has 11 touchdowns. So I mean, his yards per
mm.
reception, he's averaging about 17 yards after every catch. Like, that is insane. That's better than Nico Collins. And at 31 years old, he still gets the job done. I would be excited for the Texans to look at maybe going a little cheaper at wide receiver. Yeah, they can get some of these other guys that are
Mm.
available too, but he is a relatively cheap option. And if I'm D Rob, I'm going, man, I just had the best year of my career with Nick Caley as passing game coordinator. Maybe I want to replicate that again here in Houston, playoff contenders, potentially more. There's a lot of pros for him to land here in Houston with Nick Caley as OC.
Let's look at his last 2 years. His first one in LA, 26 receptions, 371 yards, 4 touchdowns.
Mm-hmm.
This season, 31 catches, a boost in that, 505 yards, a boost in that, 7 touchdowns. Now that does excite me. You're talking about a deal that would not break the bank. And I
Nope.
feel like that's exactly, what could be a realistic option for the Houston Texans. We have $18 million. That's not a
Yeah.
lot of money. We have to make sure we get Derek Stingley done this offseason, because if he gets another all pro, that price tag is only going to go up. Demarcus Robinson, I think, would be cheap, Harley. And you're talking about someone who is coming off a career year. I could immediately see him being the number 2 wide receiver here in Houston next to Nico Collins.
Yeah, and that's perfectly fine because even if you got Demarcus Robinson,
Mhm.
that shouldn't even be the end of your day when it comes to free agency at
No.
wide receiver. You will have a lot of money left over to still dip again into this wide receiver market. Demarcus Robinson doesn't shy you away from even drafting a wide receiver. Hell, if the Texans, and this has been my mindset, I would not mind them going into this wide receiver market and go, okay, we can double dip with two cheaper
Mhm.
options and immediately improve what was wide receiver 3 and 4 for you this last year, and immediately have a Demarcus Robinson and fill in the blank whoever else, and have them two guys. And if you drafted a wide receiver as well at 25, you have just boosted this offense going
Mm.
into the 2025 season for Nick Caley. And then you have Nico Collins and a crop of receivers that are good enough to get separation, that know the scheme well. They're familiar with Nick Caley. They're going to have an offseason to work here. And you draft someone like that. That's very exciting for me. Yes, there are other wide receivers that are out there that maybe you can spend a little money on and just get one of them and still draft somebody. But I don't mind either way, but I do prefer being a little thrifty and
Mm.
saving money.
Yeah, I feel like Demarcus Robinson could be a, low risk, high reward. Another low risk, high reward. You brought this guy up many times, and that is Elijah Moore,
Oh, yes, yes.
25 years old, 4 years in the league, doesn't have a season below 400 yards. His first 2 years, the New York Jets. His previous 2 years, the Cleveland Browns, two horrible organizations, but he has put up respectable numbers. Let's go back last year, 2023, 59
Mhm.
catches, 640 yards, 2 touchdowns with Cleveland. This year, 61 catches, 538 yards, 1 touchdown. And that is with the horrible quarterback play from the Cleveland Browns this year. That includes the horrible quarterback play in New York where he was being thrown the ball by Zach Wilson.
Yeah.
CJ Stroud would immediately be the best quarterback Elijah Moore has played with in his entire career. And I think better football is ahead of him if CJ is throwing him the rock.
Yeah, I agree with you. I love Elijah Moore. I think again, this is another guy that you wouldn't be afraid to double dip, grab 2-for-1 kind of option here, get that BOGO deal at wide receiver for the Texans. Elijah Moore, you just
Mhm.
mentioned the stats there. He had 100 targets his 2 previous years. That's why the stats are even a little bit higher for him. He didn't get any playing time as much as he wanted to with the New York Jets. That's why he wanted out. He's thinking, oh, I'm going to Cleveland. Deshaun Watson just got here. Like, I am about to eat. And it just didn't happen because, well, Deshaun's potential and his ability to play the quarterback position fell out of the bottle. And it just never coming back, it seems like. So, unfortunately for Elijah Moore, he's never had a quarterback to play with. Deshaun Watson, Joe Flacco, Dorian Thompson Robinson. I think Jameis Winston's thrown in there. Like, he has just not had a good quarterback to play with. So, yeah, CJ's immediately the best guy for him. And I think this would make a lot of sense. He does a lot of work heavily in the slot. And that's something you don't currently have at wide receiver, considering Tank Dell is going to be out for the following year. So, yeah, you can fill the slot position immediately with Elijah Moore. And he's a young guy.
Mhm. Your reaction if the Houston Texans got both Elijah Moore and a Demarcus Robinson, because neither of those guys would break the bank for the Houston Texans. Neither of those guys are being talked about at all in terms of top free agent. Hell, even top 100 free agents. I've seen the NFL list, the CBS list. I have not seen Demarcus Robinson or Elijah Moore on the top 100 free agents available in 2025. I think that would be a home run, dude. Your wide receiver core gets immediately better.
Yeah, I agree with you. Like I mentioned, it's like a BOGO deal. You buy one, get one free kind of deal, you know? You can, and Nick Casario is known for giving out 1 to 2 year
Mhm.
contracts. This is an easy 1 year deal, 2 year deal kind of contract for Demarcus Robinson and even Elijah Moore. Elijah Moore is going to want to prove that, he's going to want to test this market again. He's a young guy. I believe he's only like 24, 25 years old. So he's a young guy. He's going to want to test this market again. Why not try to reset your career and show people, hey, I can be a legitimate wide receiver as long as I'm given a good quarterback. This is what I can do, and let me prove it here in Houston. And if it's a 1 year, $5 million deal, I'm happy. Demarcus Robinson, 2 years, $10 million. I'd be happy. Like
Mhm.
those two deals right there excite me. And immediately, because of how bad this wide receiver group is, immediately those are your wide receiver 2 and 3 options. And then it doesn't shy you away from drafting one either. So I don't mind this at all. And it also frames into the trying to develop players argument
Mhm.
that Nick Casario or D'Amico Ryans was one of them two that talked about developing players. And so that doesn't, you can draft a wide receiver. And if these two guys are gone the following year, you're comfortable that, let's say, Emeka Egbuka or Matthew Golden are there at 25, and you get one of them to pair up with these two receivers, and them two receivers are gone in the next year, you still have Golden, you got Nico Collins, and then you're hoping Tank Dell is possibly healthy to play in 2027. That's a pretty good trio of wide receivers right there, and that's pretty scary.
Dude, that's 2 years from now. And if we know one thing, it's going to be here sooner rather than later.
Mm-hmm.
But I wouldn't mind either of those two. And just, think about a wide receiver and core of Nico Collins, Emeka, Elijah Moore, and Demarcus Robinson. And, vice versa would be, Matthew Golden, Nico. That would just excite me whatsoever. I want a wide receiver at 25. Dem 15 says, go get Adams, who has been released by the New York Jets. Now it has been reported that he wants to play with Aaron Rodgers or
Yeah.
wants to stay in the West Coast, and that is something that Harley has been talking about the past month. If you throw those two out the window and you have a conversation with Devontae Adams, Harley, would you like to see Houston bring him in?
Absolutely. I mean, we talked about, I wouldn't mind one or the other. The one is the BOGO deal of wide receiver we just mentioned with
Mhm.
Demarcus Robinson and Elijah Moore, but the tone of voice changes when you speak about a Devontae Adams type of receiver to come here paired with Nico Collins. It all depends on his value in his
Mhm.
contract. How much money does he want? I'm not spending no more than 15 million for Devontae Adams. I'm sorry. That's as much as I'd go.
15 a
And
year?
you that what's that?
Like 15 a year?
Yeah,
So 2 years,
that's
30 mil?
I would spend that much and I would be ecstatic because Devonte Adams and what he does, his ability to get separation, the guy, 7 years in the last 7 years, 5 of the past 7 years, he's had over 100 catches, he's had over 1,000 yards. Like even this previous year, he still had over 1,000 yards, and that sounds crazy because the man had a peculiar season, whether giving up on the Raiders a little bit because he wanted to get traded to New York. He ends up getting traded to New York with Aaron Rodgers. And the season that everyone talks about is Aaron Rodgers had a horrible year. And you're thinking, oh, Devontae Adams must not have that good of a year. And then you go look at it, and the man still put up his numbers. 3-time All Pro here with Nico Collins.
Mhm.
There's nothing else to be said there.
I mean, you're talking about one of the best wide receiver duos in the NFL of Nico and Devontae. I mean, obviously, him wanting to play in the West Coast is very well. Him wanting to
Yeah.
play with Aaron Rodgers is very real. Wonder what it would take the Houston Texans
Mm,
to get Devontae here in Houston. But man, you're talking about fireworks here. And if you remember, Devontae Adams, I believe, was on the Up and Adams podcast, and he has said
yes.
how he told the Raiders organization to go trade up. And I believe they had the seventh or ninth
Something like that.
overall pick in that draft and said, go get CJ. And then, we've heard multiple times say that, we've heard CJ say if he
Hmm.
had, to put out the best 11 out there, which wide receivers is he throwing out there? He always loves to throw out Devontae Adams.
It's
Maybe,
true.
maybe there is something there. I'm not too sure, but Devontae Adams, dude, in a Houston Texans uniform, how does that not feed families?
Yeah, that would excite me, man. That there's a lot of receivers that got cut, and he's one of the big fish in the pond.
Mm. So another wide receiver who is being planned on released, Christian Kirk from the
Mm,
Jacksonville Jaguars. Now, if you remember a couple of years ago, we had a conversation, me and you, Harley, about bringing him in to,
yeah.
Houston when he was a free agent, spent his first part of his career with the Arizona Cardinals. He's coming off of a season for 27 catches, 379 yards, one touchdown, only appeared in 8 games this year, season cut short due to a broken collarbone. Appeared in 12 games last year for Jacksonville, 57 catches, 787 yards, 3 touchdowns. His first season, though, this is where you're like, wow, 84
Hmm.
catches, 1,108 yards, 8 touchdowns. He is now being released in what would have been the final year of his deal in Jacksonville. Harley, your thoughts on Christian Kirk? Would you want the Houston Texans to bring him in?
Oh, absolutely.
Mm.
Absolutely. Christian Kirk makes a lot of sense for the Houston Texans. You take him away from a division rival from the Jacksonville Jaguars. You put him here with CJ Stroud and Nico Collins, and you immediately have a legitimate wide receiver, too. We were talking about Demarcus Robinson and Elijah Moore, and as much as they're bargain bin options, there's still a question of whether or not they can competitively, be a wide receiver 2 and 3 option. There's no question that Christian Kirk could come in here and immediately be a game changer for the Houston Texans and what they want to scheme offensively in his first full year with the Jaguars. You're looking at a guy that broke out with 8 touchdowns, over 1,000 yards receiving, and this was on 133 targets. Like That's the most targets he's had in his career. I would expect the Texans to do a lot of work with Christian Kirk and
Mhm.
Nico Collins. That just sounds like a great duo. And then when you think about his value, like money wise, it shouldn't be anybody that's going to break the bank
Mm-mm.
either. The Jaguars overpaid for him to get there, and
Was it 80 million?
it was a very good
Yes.
deal for them considering the production he gave them year one. I didn't think he was going to be that great. Now, obviously, it sucked that the last 2 years he got hurt, and that's something that you have to keep in mind. You got to take a look into his injury history there, because he's never finished a season all the way. He hasn't, unfortunately. But that is something that when you go into the negotiating table, that money decreases a little bit because you're going, well, sorry, Christian Kirk, unfortunately, you've never really finished a season, bud, and
Mhm.
I wouldn't mind the Texans going after him, Nico. That's scary right there, and I need that to happen in the best way possible.
It's scary because I could see it being a realistic option. I could see
Yes.
the Houston Texans bringing in someone like a Christian Kirk. And, you asked him to be the man in Arizona. You asked him to be the man in Jacksonville. You're not asking him to be the man here. We're asking him to be Robin. And, dude, Nico Collins, Christian Kirk, you add in a first round or a second round wide receiver. I think that's a pretty damn good wide receiver group. And, man, what would 1 year, $12 million, $13 million do for Christian Kirk? Would that excite you? Or would you want a
Yeah, I
two
think
year
it
deal?
would. He's only 28 years old. He's trying to look to get that contract he got from the Jacksonville Jaguars again. And if he can come here for the Texans, and I'm saying if he could come here at a $12 million a year for 1 year, then at 1 year, 12 million, 13 million, and come here and show to the rest of the NFL, yeah, I still got it. I could still do this at a high
Mm.
level, and so he might want to test the market again, free agency wise. So again, Nick Sarah's the king of 1 to 2 year deals, man.
So the last wide receiver that we got news about was DK Metcalf, not being released, but has
Man,
requested a trade away from Seattle. So hey, man, potentially losing both Tyler Lockett. Well, for sure losing Tyler Lockett, but
yeah.
potentially losing DK Metcalf also in the final year of his deal. Once a contract. Look, I would love this move, but I don't think the Houston Texans are in any situation right now to make DK Metcalf one of the highest paid wide receivers in the NFL. Uh, but dude, just imagine Nico Collins on one side, DK Metcalf on the other, and then in a Mekabuka or Matthew Golden just destroying up the middle. Don't see it happening, but interesting to see how it plays out.
Yeah, I don't see it happening just because of he's going to want a contract extension. But man, DK Metcalf, I'm right there with you, K Mac 11. DK Metcalf, him and the pairing of Nico Collins brings a physicality to this Texans offense that could resemble what the Texans do defensively. Because my goodness, two big old wide receivers opposite of each other, two big targets for CJ
Mhm.
Stroud. It is a pipe dream that Texans fans are going to have to get away from because unfortunately, it's just not going to happen. He is going to want that contract extension. He still had some good years, even with Geno Smith at quarterback. He's had some really good years with the Seattle Seahawks, and a little bit of a decrease statistically. But again, Geno Smith at quarterback, and ultimately, this feels like a team that needs a wide receiver, like a young team like the New England Patriots, someone else down the road. Hell, maybe even if the Raiders want to take a look at DK Metcalf just because of the connection to Pete Carroll, that's an immediate connection to the Denver Broncos. Don't have a receiver, and
Oh,
they
he will
need
look
somebody.
nasty in a Denver
They
Broncos
need
uni.
somebody to pair with that young quarterback over there in Bo Nix who turned some heads last year. Shocked me too. So, who knows what happens there. But DK Metcalf is definitely not going to be an option for the Houston Texans, unfortunately.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we want to thank everyone who was a part of this live stream, and we will be back Friday, 6 o'clock. Hopefully, we have some news for you regarding if the Houston Texans brought in anyone, if they made any signings. I am excited. That was Harley. I am Ruben. For more Houston Texans content, just come back to Bleach Report. Do me all a favor, guys. Have a real blessed rest of y'all's day.